Hello guys, and welcome back. This is going to be part 2 in my video series of how to start producing your own demos. If you haven't seen last week's video, I highly recommend you do so.
And you do so quickly.
In this video, we're going to be focusing on 3 main topics. The first one's going to be gain staging, the second one's going to be some basic EQing, and the third one's going to be some basic leveling. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Okay guys, so we're back, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about gain staging before we start. And gain staging is literally what we started talking about last week, with making sure that your signal isn't going into the red, so it's not clipping, and your signal isn't so low that you'll start to get hiss when you bring up the volume. And what we're doing here is just going to be expanding on that. There's a couple of things to keep in mind with gain staging and software. One of the main things is a lot of plugins, a lot of software plugins prefer the signal to be minus 18 to minus 12 decibels. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be lowering the signal of all these tracks to be coming in and peaking at minus 12 dB. And the way that we're going to measure that is these meters here. These are I don't find them very useful, so I prefer to use a meter at the end of my signal chain, and I'm using this free plugin from Uline. Well, it's the free version anyway. There's a paid version, which I think is about 50 quid, but this free version is really good. And what it does is it will show us our true peak, and it's also going to show us the LUFS. And LUFS are loudness units relative to full scale, but we're not really going to be focusing too much on that. We're going to be focusing mainly on the peaks. So I'm going to play the drum track, and we're going to have a look at where it's peaking. So we can see here it's peaking well over 3 decibels, and you can see that if we just scroll over here. Yeah, it's peaking right up to about 3 dB, which is not what we want. We want it to be more down here at minus 18 dB. So yeah, by the way, I'm using Superior Drummer to get all my drum tracks down. If you're using just a standard software instrument, this will still apply, or if you're using just audio recordings. So yeah, don't worry about the actual sound of the drums. You know, this video is just going to be about sort of gain staging, doing some sort of basic kind of mixing and some basic leveling, but we're not actually going to be focusing on the actual sound of the drums or anything like that. So yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type into the master volume. I'm going to type in minus 18 decibels. So let's have a look at where we are on the loudness meter now. And what I can do now is actually bring up the volume to Unity. I had to actually turn it down because it was clipping on the output. But yeah, now we can see that the true peak is around minus 14 dB, which is much more what we want. It's not exactly minus 18 dB, but it doesn't really matter because when we get a compressor on here, that will reduce the peaks slightly more. It's you know, as you can hear, it's a very uncompressed sound. So yeah, we've got quite a difference between the LUFS and the peaks. So let's have a look at our peaks, and yeah, you know, minus 14. That's pretty good anyway. Like you could probably just leave it there, but we're gonna try and get it a bit closer to minus 18, I think, in this video. So I'm gonna leave it there for the drums for the time being, and I'm gonna move on to the guitars. So what I'm gonna do for the guitars is I'm gonna put in a gain plugin at the start of the signal chain, because there's no kind of like software instrument for these, so I can't just open that and type in the master volume. And we'll have a look at how this is doing in the VU meter. Okay, so this is peaking quite high. Let me just have a look at the actual peaks. Yeah, this is peaking about yeah, like minus 4 dB, which is still pretty high. Yeah, we want this to be a bit lower, so I'm going to type in minus 12, and I'm going to see if that gets us closer to minus 18. So yeah, let's see how close we are with this. And yeah, you can see like we're pretty much right on minus 18 dB there, and also if I play a little bit more. See, like minus 18 right there, and we're not really going much above it. So I think that's kind of what we want. And what I'm actually going to do to save on time, I'm going to open the mixer window here, and I'm just going to copy and paste this gain plugin over to the next one. So yeah, like in the last video I mentioned, I've double tracked the guitars, so this is literally exactly the same sound. I just realised I don't have my output on. So yeah, this is exactly the same sound, exactly the same setup, but I've just tracked the guitars twice to give more of a stereo sound. So I can basically just pan one left and pan one right, and I'll show you what that sounds like in a bit. But yeah, we're going to go over to the bass now, and I'm just going to copy this plugin over to the bass. Let's see how we're doing on the bass. Let's move this over to the peaks, I think. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I might actually want to turn that down a little bit more. I think I'm going to actually turn that down to -15. Let's see how we're doing with that. Alright, so that's much more like it. That's pretty much bang on where we want it, -17.4. That'll do perfectly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to copy and paste that over to the next track. Now this is what I was talking about earlier with recording your bass amp and taking your DI out. I've essentially done the same thing, but this is kind of like my distortion track. You can use a bass amp sound if you prefer, or even you can like take the DI signal and then duplicate it and distort it. So it's exactly the same take, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to be blending the distorted signal with the original. So it's not going to add any volume or anything onto it. It's just going to be kind of a blended signal. Whereas with these, we're actually trying to create a stereo sound with them. So let's have a look at how we're doing with the distorted track. And alright, that's pretty good, but that's pretty low. I have to say the peaks are really, really low, so I'm going to turn that up a little bit. Probably go to maybe minus 13 or something like that. Yeah, that's kind of more what we want. Right, so I'm going to leave that there for the gain staging. Now I'm going to go on to like bussing out some of the guitars and the bass tracks. Okay, so we have the guitars, the bass, and the drums all set up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start bussing them out. So I'm going to bus these guitars out to a stereo bus. And I'm just going to call this one guitars. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start bringing up the volume of these, just so that we can hear what they sound like in context with the drums. Alright, that sounds pretty good. As you can see, we can't really bring the faders up because that will make it way too loud at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a EQ or something onto this bus channel, and I'm going to use that to turn it down so I can bring these faders up. Because you really want your faders at unity, so if you make any changes with those faders, it's going to be really small. As you can see, like when you start bringing the faders down here, the numbers begin to get smaller and smaller, so you can't have any accuracy with it. So I'm going to bring it back up to about there. So actually what I'm going to do with this channel is I'm going to add in a gain just to reduce the overall volume, and then I'll be able to bring up these faders to unity. So yeah, I'm going to try and reduce this by about -15 because that's what it's set out at the on the guitar faders. And I'll try and bring these up, and let's see how this sounds. Alright, that sounds pretty good. I might turn that up a little bit more. Alright, sweet. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and put on an EQ, and I'm actually going to put on the Harrison Consoles Legacy Q. This is a really good EQ for being quite precise. And it hasn't got a huge amount of bands on it, but we don't need a massive amount. We just need to do some basic filtering and maybe a little bit of cutting. So I'm going to turn on the analyzer. Oh, let's turn up the trim a little bit. And we can kind of see where this guitar is sitting. So I'm just going to take this band and I'm just going to sweep it to about, I think, that's 6K or so. And for those who don't know, this is just a low-pass filter. So what it does essentially is it just filters out all the high end and lets the low end pass through. So we just want to kind of do this because there's not really that much information in the really high end of the guitars which kind of comes through or is necessary, so it's kind of good to just filter a bit of that out. And I'm going to actually filter this down to about 6K, I think. So yeah, I'm going to cut it about there. I've given it a bit of a harsher filter, so about 24 dB per octave, I think. And now I'm going to do the same with the low end, and I'm just going to filter this up to, I think, about, for now, let's just stick with about 50. Okay, so I'm going to essentially do the same thing, and I'm going to make this a bit harsher, about 24 dB. I'm just going to bypass that. And you can hear this quite prominently at the moment, but when it's in the mix you won't. And I'll give you an example of that now. And without. You should just notice a little bit of harshness kind of coming out of there, but you shouldn't really notice anything too extreme. So another thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a tiny little cut around 4K. And I'm going to see if I can tighten this Q and just reduce this. Oh, just type in 4. Okay. And now I'm just going to reduce the gain just down to about 3 dB, I think. And I'm going to take a little bit out of, I think, about 80 to 90 hertz, because we want the bass to sit here. And I'm going to tighten that Q as well. Bring that down to about 3 dB. And I'm going to take a little bit of 400 hertz out, because just I don't like it. There's a few frequencies that you just kind of come to dislike in guitars, and I don't like too much of 400 hertz. So I'm just going to take that down, and I'm going to tighten that up a little bit. So let's have a listen to it on its own, without the EQ, and with. And again, that sounds pretty harsh on its own, but in context, it should sound a bit better. Actually, I don't know if I've got the gain engaged on the output. I don't think I have the gain engaged on the output. I'm going to put a gain on the output quickly, just so it's louder so you guys can hear it a bit better. Okay, yeah, so let me just play this again without. And with. You should just be able to hear a bit of mud and a bit of harshness just coming out a little bit. I'm not going to go too crazy than that. And keep in mind, this is like a paid plugin, but you can do this with kind of stock plugins. There's nothing particularly special about what I'm doing here. Most stock plugins will have an analyzer or something like that. And also there's plenty of free plugins online. I think Blue Cat Audio do a couple of really good ones. But yeah, I just prefer to use this plugin because I find it's very exact. So yeah, what I'm going to do now is move on to the bass, and I'm going to bus this out very quickly. I'm going to bus this out to a, and I want this to be on a mono channel. We don't want it to be stereo because the guitars are stereo, so we want the bass to be on a mono channel. What I'm going to do is I'm pretty much going to do the same thing. I'm just going to slowly turn up the volume until we can hear the bass come through in the mix. So that sounded pretty good, and some of the bass distortion. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a gain again on this bus. Oh, hang on. Very important, just making sure that this is a mono bus. We've got a stereo bus here, just making sure that this is a mono bus. And I'm just going to put a gain on here, lower the volume a little bit. I'd say to about 11, because that's where it is on the fader there. And then I'm just going to neutralize this. I could probably get away with turning it down even a bit more. Alright, great. So that'll do for a minute. And now I'm going to just do a bit of EQing on the actual bass tracks themselves, and I'm going to do them individually because it's two sounds and one's being blended with the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to EQ this bass, and I'm going to give it a bit of a high pass. I think I'm going to select this band here and high pass it. Sorry, low pass. high pass means letting in the high end and filtering out the low end. Low pass means filtering out the high end and letting through the low end. So I'm just going to bring this down, I think, to about 300 if I can. Because 300 is kind of where the low end of the bass starts coming through on smaller speakers. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to actually move this down and give it a slight bump, just to make it cut through a little bit more. And I'm going to move that down to about 80, I think, or 85. Actually, let's just try 80. So yeah, I'm going to move that down to about 80, and then I'm going to give it a low pass, probably around 50. That'll do, and make that a bit more extreme, like a 24 dB per octave. And let's have a listen to this. That's sounding pretty good. I want to cut out a bit of 200, I think, because that can be a little bit muddy. Let's tighten that up and go down about minus 3 dB. That's sounding pretty good. So this is what it sounds like without the EQ. And with. And the reason we've got it sounding so kind of low and we've cut out loads of the high end is because the distortion track is going to be the high end. This is just providing that really sort of thick bottom end that we need. Okay, so I'm now going to give the bass a bit of compression, and I'm going to be using the Tokyo Dawn Labs compressor. So one of the main things that you've got to keep in mind with compression is the ratio. So at the moment it's on a 2-to-1 ratio, which means that if the signal exceeds the threshold by 2 decibels, it will be turned down by 1. Or if it exceeds it by 4, it will be turned down by 2, or if it exceeds it by 8, it will be turned down by 4. So essentially, it will, whatever it exceeds, it will be turned down by half. So this is kind of like very mild compression, but we're probably going to go up to about a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1 ratio. So I'm actually going to go up to a 5-to-1, and this is just to really compress and tighten down on some of the harsh transients on the bass. And I'm not too worried about like preserving some of the transients, so I'm going to make the attack a little bit quicker. If I wanted some of the picks to come through, I could reduce. I could make the attack slower. So the attack is essentially when the compressor kicks in. But because I don't really mind if the compressor kicks in too early, because there's no particular transients on the bass that I want to kind of keep in, I'm going to make it a little bit quick. I'm not going to make it too quick though. So let's have a listen to the bass without the compression. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly bring up the threshold until we can see the compressor working and we can start hearing it actually compressing the sound. So I'm actually going to slow the release because I want the compressor to stay clamped onto the bass for a bit longer. Alright, let's have a listen to it without the compression. And with. And it's pretty subtle at the moment. Like I could increase the threshold a bit more, and it would start compressing it a lot more. And without. And you'll notice it starts to add in quite a lot more sustain to the bass and reducing some of the really harsh attacks. So this is really good for the low end because you want that low end to be really solid and really prominent. So So yeah, definitely make sure that you've got a bit of a compressor on the low end of your bass. On the distortion track, however, I'm not actually going to put any kind of compression on there because it's distorted, so it's already compressed. It's already at the point where the signal is more even because the quieter sounds are getting amplified and the louder sounds are getting crushed down. So I'm actually going to reduce that down to about 10. So what I am going to do though is I'm going to notch this this bass part. And I'm going to use the same EQ, and I'm probably going to go about here, I think. And so that's 3. And let's try high pass by about 12. Let's go up to, and I think I'm going to go on to 4 and make this a low pass. So this is quite it's quite an extreme drop. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that off because I don't actually want that. I think I want something which is going to be a bit harsher, so let's try that. Let's have a look at this. I'm just going to turn on the analyzer. And let's have a look at the... Yeah, that's kind of where we want it. So yeah, that sounds pretty good. Not really going to go too more crazy than that. I think that's about all we need for kind of a basic bit of compression, a bit of EQing for the bass. So let's have a listen to the clean signal and the distorted together. That sounds pretty good, and with the other instruments. Okay, that's sounding pretty good. Now the last thing that I'm going to do is do a bit of EQing and a bit of compression on the drums. So I'm going to get open that EQ again, and I'm just going to take off a tiny bit of the low end of the drums. Not much, probably about, if I can see it properly, probably about sort of 50 or so, and I'm going to take out, I think, a bit of 80. Is that 80? No, it looks like 80, yeah. So I'm going to take out a bit of that because that's going to be where the bass is lying, so I'm just going to take out a bit of that. Actually, what I might do is I might boost a tiny bit around 50. And just lower this to 40 maybe. About 30, but I'm going to widen that a little bit. So let's have a listen to the drums on their own. And without. Okay, so that's made them a little bit more prominent. And I'm going to use this to take out some of the 80. Let's have a look. That sounds pretty good. I think I'm going to take out some 300. Just a tad. Reduce that a little bit. And I'm going to take out some like 5k because that's when the top end of the guitar is, and a little bit of 1k because that's where the bass is being notched to. Actually, that's 2k. That's, and let's have a listen to it without the EQ. And with. So that just seems to have taken out a bit of the harshness in the top end and a little bit of the muddiness in the bottom. it's not massively noticeable, but you don't really want it to sound too extreme. And I'm just going to add in that same Tokyo Dawn Labs, compressor. And I'm going to, I think, maybe try 3-to-1. And let's have a look at how we're going to do with this. I'm going to make the attack really quick because I want it to really catch down on those transients. Okay, that's starting to sound pretty good. That's just kind of catching down on the really harsh transients. It doesn't seem to be affecting the sound too much. Might increase it a little bit more. So let's have a look at where it's kind of peaking in the loudness meter. That looks much better. It's peaking now around like 15.8 decibels, so that's closer to -18. It doesn't need to be bang on, but as long as it's kind of around that. I do want to have a look at how much this is actually affecting the volume though, so I'm going to quickly bypass this. Barely at all, so I'm not actually going to even worry about that. That's sounding pretty good. Right, now the next thing I'm going to look at is leveling. Right, so one of the main things that I and a lot of people struggle with leveling is reference. It's really hard to find a reference because a lot of the time you'll hear people saying, just use your ears, use your own judgment on where to level the instruments and kind of what volume to have them at. And to a certain extent, I agree. But to another extent, if you are a musician, you are going to want to make your instrument louder. So one of the ways around this is finding a reference. So a really good reference that I've found is Pink Noise. And there are quite a few Pink Noise plugins that will just generate this Pink Noise hiss. I'll leave a few links to them in the description. But your software may actually come with one anyway. Logic did. It has a test oscillator, and if you have a look, you've got like these sine waves, square waves, all that kind of stuff, and then Pink Noise. And I'm just going to select that. I'm going to reduce this from -12 to -18 because that's kind of where we want to be. And I am going to start leveling, and this is going to sound absolutely horrible. It's going to sound really, really bad. So prepare your ears. But here we go. Actually, I've just realised I had the game plugin on. I'm going to turn that off to make it a little bit quieter. That's another thing. You actually want to make sure that when you're using it, you're not using it at a massive volume, because otherwise you aren't going to be able to hear anything. You've got to really have it relatively quiet, just so that you can hear your instrument just kind of sitting relatively at the same level. I'm using the word relatively a lot, but it's all relative. So here we go. I'm not really hearing that stand out to me, so I'm going to move straight on to the guitars. I'm actually going to be using the bus to level these. I'm not going to use the individual tracks. Actually, I've just realised before I do this, one of the main things I was going to talk about is panning. So I'm going to do this because otherwise I'm not going to be kind of leveling in context. So I'm going to pan one of the guitars to the left and one of them to the right. I'll show you the difference between it panned and unpanned after I've done this, by the way. But let's just try that again. Okay, that's sounding pretty good to me, and I'm just going to try the bass as well. That's sounding pretty good. Keep in mind, you're not going to get everything exact. This is just to give you a reference, and then you can kind of adjust it. And this is where keeping all the levels at Unity will come in handy, because you'll be able to hear where the particular instrument that's standing out to you is, and you can just lower it slightly, and you're not going to be kind of going all the way down here and fiddling with that. So let's have a listen to it. Actually, let's put the gain plugin on. And actually, that sounds pretty good. The only thing that's kind of standing out to me is the bass distortion, so I'm just going to lower that down to about minus 11 dB. But yeah, that's starting to sound pretty good to me. So yeah, I was going to show you guys the difference between panned and unpanned. So panned, with the guitars, that is, sounds like this. And unpanned, it will sound like this. You can hear the guitars are really narrow when they're unpanned, and when they're panned, they've got quite a wide sound. And I'm actually, I'll demonstrate this further by soloing the guitar tracks, showing you them unpanned and then panned. So. And panned. And if you're listening to them on some really good speakers, or even if you've got headphones in, you'll be able to hear a really significant difference. This is where kind of double tracking really does kind of come into its own, when you start panning everything and you start getting that sort of spread. And you know, like I said in the previous video, you can go really crazy. You can just like have loads of different amps, just using the same take, and then quad track it, or even 8 track it if you really want to punish yourself. But yeah, it's double tracking, multiple tracking is just a really great way to get that really nice sort of stereo spread and that really kind of big sound. So yeah, this has been essentially the video, guys. I'm going to play this one more time for you, just so you guys can kind of hear it. But that is essentially everything. Just keep in mind, like, don't need to go crazy. This is just getting kind of a basic sound, getting everything balanced, so that when we move into production and then mixing and mastering, it just will make it easier for yourself. This is just setting it up. And keep in mind, when you're putting a plugin on, make sure that it doesn't actually change the volume. If it does, have a look at the output. Pretty much every plugin that you'll find will have an output on it. So just have a look at them. This one has an output on it. You can see it right there, makeup gain. If you're finding anything's too loud or too quiet once you put the plugin on, just turn that up to compensate, turn it up or turn it down rather to compensate. And yeah, make sure that you use one of these loudness meters, because they're really good. And I really highly recommend that you check out this Ulean one, because it's actually really good. It just gives a really kind of good idea of where it's peaking and where the LUFS are. So yeah, I'm going to play this one last time for you guys. Okay guys, so this has been the video. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. If you want to hear some of my music, you can check out my band at derelictdream.com. You can also check out my composer page at facebook.com/LewisForteComposer. If you have any recommendations for future videos for me to do, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear it. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.